This is Mary Catherine at Red Robin Farm, and I'm going to do a painting tutorial of some fruit. I'm using some paper. This is B paper. That's the paper I'm using. It's 9x6. I also use Canson watercolor paper, and rarely I'll use my Arches paper. It's very expensive. So today I'm using a 9x6 B paper. It's pretty good watercolor paper. Buy the best paper you can and use the best paint you can. I'm pulling up my reference photo, which is actually a watercolor painted by somebody else. And I've done this before. The frame one is one I painted a few months ago. I liked it well enough to frame it and put it on my bedroom wall. This is one I did yesterday, I think, that I don't like very much. Now I'm going to do the sketch. Now sketching is so important. And if you are filling your paper with an image and you want it to look good, you need to sketch first. I am not a sketcher. This is not my forte. But I have learned that just launching into your paper with your paintbrush can be a big mistake. Now there are some things that I do freehand and I enjoy it. If I'm just going to do some flowers or leaves that are easy to do freehand and are very flowing. But if I want to fill my paper with things that are in front of and behind each other and I want some depth to it, you really have to sketch, especially if you're a beginner like I really am still. I've been painting a year. I'm very much an amateur. I'm doing this tutorial because I have some friends who asked me to, but honestly, folks, there are wonderful professional painters that you can view on YouTube, and they are so much better than I am. So Grant Fuller and Emma Lefevre and Elisa Laporte those are just a few. CC's Creations, they're also good. You can barely see this sketch. But I'm just doing a branch, some large fruit, some small fruit, and about half of the leaves that I'm going to do. I'm going to add in some leaves afterward because there's just too many leaves. All right, now I'm going to cut in my background. I'm going to cut in the blue of the sky. And I'm showing you different ways to do this. I'm going to go ahead and lay down some paint in that first section, but now I'm putting in just plain water. You can do that as well, and then add some paint, some wet pigment afterward, and you'll see it flow. That's what watercolor is supposed to do. It's supposed to move. And look at that. It will move. The wet pigment will only move as far as the paper is wet. When it comes to dry paper, it won't move anymore. So if you put water down first and then you add some wet paint, it will only travel as far as the water is on the paper and no further. And sometimes I do that, just start with water and then add pigment. You see here, I'm actually using that excess blue there. I had too much, and I'm using it to paint other stuff because I really, like I said, that's a beginner's mistake, and I do a lot of that. So now I'm going to cut in some more dark, and I'm going to again use that. You don't want the blue of the sky to be the same all over your picture because sky doesn't look that way. Some of it's dark and some of it's light. And if you look at watercolor paintings you like, you'll notice that they'll use a variety of blues and even other colors, purples and even greens and stuff for the background. Now I did my sketch, and so now I'm just cutting that blue in everywhere that there's not a branch, a fruit, or a leaf. And this takes a little while. All this setting up, the sketching and the background is time consuming, but it is so worth it and important. Part of the difficulty of painting is knowing what to paint. And for years, I didn't paint anything because I didn't know what I wanted to paint. And that's what reference and resource paintings and photos are for. I have a folder on the desktop of my computer where I keep images, photos that I've found online that I think, ooh, that's pretty. I'd like to try to paint that. I have better success with watercolors, with painting, with photographs of watercolors than I do photographs of real things. Because a photograph of a watercolor shows you that it can be done. Somebody else painted it with watercolor, and so you know you can. And sometimes you can even look at the photograph and say, oh, I see how they did that. And you can see their method or their technique in what they painted. So you see, I kind of start on the edges and work toward the middle. I think that blue at the top is a little dark. I'm using my blow dryer here to dry some of the wet spots. Now the color there that I just got in that round palette, that's called Payne's Gray. Now that's an expensive tube of paint, but I bought it recently because a lot of painters that I respect online were saying this is a useful color. You can blend it with anything. Payne's is Payne'. You can blend it with anything else, and it kind of tones it down. It subdues it. They had another word for it, but I forget. So I like to mix it with blues, and it'll give you kind of a smoky blue. What am I getting out now? Oh, okay. I'm going to do my masking fluid now. There are various ways to get white on your watercolor. And this is a picture that's full of color, but there are some spots you want to put a little bit of white to show that light is shining on it. And masking fluid is one way to do that. It's very rubbery. You have to shake it a lot. This is faintly tinted orange. And I'm just going to use a brush that I reserve only for masking fluid. And I'm going to make little curved lines on the top of the fruit to show where the light is coming from. I'm assuming that the light is coming from that top corner that's close to you where the big branch is, that the light is kind of coming from that direction. And so I'm going to put a little line of white. And what the masking fluid does is it seals the paper. And then you paint everything on top of it. And then after it's all done and dried, then you gently remove the masking fluid and those little white lines will still be there. And other, like acrylics and oils, you actually have white paint you can use. White watercolor paint really doesn't work very well that way, especially if you're using it really as watercolor is supposed to be used, which is it's runny, it's wet, it's a wash. And so the paints are designed to blend into each other. Well, if you blend your white watercolor paint into something else, it's not white anymore. So masking fluid is a good solution to that, as long as you know how to use it. After I put this masking fluid on, I cannot blow dry this painting anymore. The blow dryer heat will cause the masking fluid to damage my paper when I try to remove it. All right, now I'm going to start the fruit, and I want you to see my palette there. I'm using, oh dear, what's the name of that one? That's cadmium yellow. That's another one I paid for a separate tube because I didn't have it and I really wanted it. Now each piece of this fruit is going to have various colors. You don't want to have a fruit that's all one color. Everything I put on here is going to have a variety of tone in the item. Even, as I said, the sky is that way. And all of this paint is wet, and so it's going to run into each other because the yellow is wet and the red is wet, and they're touching each other, so they're going to run and blend. And that's what you want. You want that line between them to kind of merge, and I'm going to take a little orange and try to do that too. And when it's wet, it looks kind of funny, but actually that piece of fruit is going to look just like a piece of fruit when you're done. Now I'm going to do one of the leaves. No, that's not a leaf. I'm doing a fruit. The fruit is riper toward the bottom and less ripe toward the top where the stem end is. And so I'm having that one be green, and then I'm going to gradually have it become yellow. And then gradually I'll have it become darker orange and then red. And you see there's a leaf that's actually on top of that piece of fruit. You really want to have some of the leaves in front of fruit and some of the leaves obviously behind fruit. Same with the branches, so that there's a three-dimensional effect. Now, as I said, if the paint is wet, it will run into anything else that's wet. Now, I've got a piece of fruit that's in front of that piece I'm painting right now. See that curve right there? And so I want that all to blend together. I'm going to encourage it to blend real gently. One of my big flaws as a new painter is putting too much water and too much pigment on anything I'm painting. And I notice this when I watch really good painters. They don't do that. I'm going to add a little bit of darker, that's a really deep kind of purpley color. I wish I knew the names of some of these. The rectangular palette over there is a Kuretake watercolor hands. Now I'm making a big mistake here. I got some yellow and I'm about to start this next piece of fruit, and then I realize, oh no, don't do that, because that fruit is right next to that other piece. And if I painted that, they would run together, and that red from that other fruit would run right into that, and I would ruin that painting. So I stopped quick enough before they touched. And now I'm going to move on to some other fruit, some smaller fruit. And it's also going to have various colors in it, a little bit of color variation, but because this fruit is further away and toward the bottom of the picture, which for me means it's darker in the bottom, then I'm using deeper reds and some darker purples too. And again, I got too much pigment. I'm wasting paint there. That drives me crazy. But I got too much pigment. I got too much water there. See how runny that is? It's important for the paint and the water to run, but you shouldn't have a puddle. If you have a puddle sitting on your paper, you've got too much. And that happens to me a lot. It's one of the flaws of being a new painter that I'm working on. So you see how I have leaves that are laying over some of that fruit, and I'm being really careful to keep them dry, not touch those. And see, I'm lightening that one. That orange had disappeared, and I'm taking off some of the red. That's something you can do too. While the paint is still wet, you can take a damp brush and you can wipe off almost some of the paint, and you can tilt the paper and cause the paint to move in a direction. And I'll do that sometimes. If I want the yellow to wash down so that it stands out more. Okay, what am I going to do next? Is it time for leaves, or do I have more? I've got some more fruit up there, it looks like. Yeah, this is another piece up there. And this piece is going to be brighter because it's at the top of the painting, closer to where I feel like the light is coming from. Again, I have too much water there. Can you see the puddling? But the safest thing to do there, unless you just really have to, and see how I'm letting the yellow run down. I have so much that I'm going to take a Kleenex and see how that, if you just barely touch it, the Kleenex will absorb that. And so always keep a Kleenex handy. I also have a paper towel in my hand, and I use it to dab my brush, to take water out of my brush, and you'll see me do that sometimes. Now I'm darkening the bottom of that fruit. It's that gradual contrast of color that gives depth and interest to this particular painting. And I should mention that the resource watercolor photograph that I'm using was done by somebody whose last name was Rogers. That's all I could read on. Now I'm trying to dry it. Because I can't use my blow dryer, I'm using a fan. Gloria, if you're watching this is one of your old fans from Sutter House. I still have a handful of those, and I use one to dry my paintings. Now we're going to get a little closer. I'm going to start to do leaves. Now this painting has lots and lots of leaves. Every leaf should have a dark side and a light side, or one color on one side and one color on another. It shows a positioning of light, but also the fact that the leaves are changing color, and just makes them so beautiful. You don't want these uniform colors. Now what I'm doing here is I think that's a Persian blue, and again I'm taking some Payne's gray, which just gives it a very pretty. See, it's got a deep blue gray. And one way that you can get the color variety you want is to paint the leaf on one side, whatever paint color you choose, then rinse out your paintbrush and just use water on the other side, and the water will pull the paint you've already laid down on the one half of the leaf. It'll pull it into the other half, but it'll be lighter. And so you'll get this nice contrast again of color. Now I'm a very messy painter, and that bucket of water is too full, and every time I rinse out my brush, I splatter it. Okay, now I've decided that that piece of fruit, the other piece of fruit behind, is dry enough. And so I'm starting this piece of fruit, and I do lots of yellow, lots of paint there. Notice how I'm going all the way from edge to edge. You don't want to just blotch it in, you want a smooth look. And then I'm putting the red on the bottom. I have better red selection in my Kuretakes, but I have better brown selection in my other palette, the white palette there. Those are Mission Gold. Adam got me those for Christmas. Now see how I tilt the paper and I let that orange run into there? It makes it so you don't have this straight line that cuts across the paper that has all this, it just looks more natural. Okay, so now that I got that done, we're going to continue with leaves. Now this is a kind of an important leaf. It's right in the middle of the painting. And I'm doing it blue because on that resource photograph, she had some blue leaves. And oh my goodness, they pop out and look so good. Now, notice on this leaf, this is going to be a green one. Again, I did dark green, an olive green on one side, and then I come back with some kind of a purple or brown, I guess. As long as they're both wet, and I felt like that was too much pigment, so I'm going back in and taking some out and get them right up next to the fruit, but that really looks like it's coming out from behind that piece of fruit. I like the blue leaves, green leaves, purple leaves, brown leaves, yellow leaves, really leaves of almost any color. Some dark, some light. It may be that on a real apple tree, you wouldn't have that much variety at any given time in the season, but in this painting it looks really good. I meant to talk about the composition of the painting a little bit. That's something that's the reason why I still have the other paintings in front of me to look at, because you don't want to start with the focal point of your painting right in the middle. Notice how the two big pieces of fruit, one of them is off center to the left and one of them is off center to the bottom. None of the fruit is right in the middle of the paper. And I have 3 primary pieces of fruit. And a lot of painters will tell you that 3 items that you're trying to get your viewer to look at, that's a good thing to do. Notice I'm trying to get kind of dark edges on those leaves. That's really nice effect. That's another reason to put your color on one side along one edge and then just draw it back with some water. That's one of the best skills I learned from some of those tutorials, is how to lay down a wash, some wet watercolor paint, and then come back with just water and let the water pull that paint. It's just some of that. See what I'm doing? That's exactly what I'm doing there. I'm putting down water and trying to draw that green out, and it's going to give me a more natural looking leaf. Now all of these are the leaves that I actually sketched in. Because I'm right-handed, I'm always rotating my paper around so that I can see things better. But I'm going to put in a lot of additional leaves. Now see, the reason I had to do those 2 leaves at the same time is that I started off with too much pigment. Again, too much pigment. And so I had to do one and then put the dark on the other. I'm trying to get that green to draw in. But it's already starting to look like something. So if you're going to paint something, make sure that you don't put the focal point of your painting right in the middle of the paper. Move it to the side. One of my friends who asked me to do this, she painted a picture of 3 crosses on a hill. And if you want to do that, put the hill a little bit off center, put the crosses a little bit off center. It'll actually make it do better. You really want to, one thing you're doing as a painter is you're plotting like an eye movement path for your viewer, so that when they look at your painting, you actually are trying to get their eyes to move around the paper in a circle or in a diagonal line, But the one thing you don't want them to do is just land in the middle of the paper and stop there. And that's what having something in the middle of the paper does. There's some more Payne's gray. The Payne's gray, honestly, on its own is a nice color too. I really want this painting to be dark toward the bottom, so I'm going to add lots of leaves at the bottom of the painting. See, now I'm going to start to freehand some. And I just put, I guess I just put water in there. And then you can just, oh, that was too much. I really like having that white towel there. That's a really useful thing to do. You can bleach it and wash it out. See, I'm adding a little extra color there. It's very important to have various items in your painting overlapping other items. And I'm going to leave a little room there. Add a little brown, I think. No, that was orange. And then it was too dark, so I came back and removed some of the orange and purple. You get it right up by the edge. I find painting very relaxing because you have to focus so much. Now I'm making a big mistake here. I'm painting a leaf over top of a place where I put some masking fluid on that branch. And I'm going to really pay for that later when I come back, and I'm going to actually remove that masking fluid, and it's going to give me a big white line in the middle of that leaf there, that dark leaf that I painted a second ago. You can actually already see that white line going up the side of that. Can you see it there? And I would have been better off not removing the masking fluid. And because right there, it almost looks a little bit like a vein on the leaf, but boy, when you take the masking fluid off, it looks awful. So yet again, another beginner mistake. I've been using masking fluid for about a month, maybe. I really like the purple leaves. They just look great. See the addition of all these little leaves down there. Just if you think if you're scared to do more, that probably means you need to. And one thing I really do is I put leaves behind other leaves, and I will lay a leaf right over top of a branch. When you put the branches in, most likely you have too much branch showing. If you really look, see, I'm dabbing off some splashed paper. I put splashed water. I just put on my paper. But if you really look at a tree, there's just little pieces of the branch that show through. But there's more Payne's gray on one side of that. But it's mostly a lot of leaves, and you really need to cover up. The branches should just stick out in a few places. Most of these leaves are just rounded on the side and have a little point. Some of them I try to get them to curve around a little bit, but in fall I really like to paint autumn things, and you can learn how to do a lot of different shapes of leaves. That's really fun. I decided that little branch sticking out right there needed something off of it. It's interesting how you don't really need that much fruit because some of it is so big. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces of fruit, and some of them are really small. See, even that leaf with that dark green, that's not too much. Oh, yeah, it is too much. But unless you're trying to paint something in the wintertime, you don't want to have lots of bare branches. Now you can see it a little closer up. And here pretty soon we'll start in on the branches. I don't have a lot of brown leaves because the branches are going to be brown. Now hopefully this close you can really get a feeling for how much water, how much pigment is in some of this. It's very definitely wet, it's very definitely moving, but you don't want to have too much. And when I feel like I've got too much, I come back in and I remove it. If you want for wet paint to come off on your brush so you can lift it off, your paint brush has to be wet as well. So you have to not get it sopping wet. It needs to be a little wet. Okay, now it's time for branches. Now I'm going to start with yellow ochre. That's what that is. And then I'm going to come back in with, I think that is burnt sienna. I think I skipped the raw sienna. And I think the dark one is, I don't know, it's a really dark brown. It's right next to my black. It might be Van Dyke. I don't know. But the point here is that each branch, the branches should not just be brown. I'm going to have like 3 to really 4 colors on each branch going down. And as I get away from where the light is, the branches will get slightly darker. Okay. So there's the darker on the bottom. The darker will be on the bottom of the branch and the lighter on the top of the branch, again, because of where the light is coming from. Now, also, you should know that this video has been sped up a bit. I don't really paint this fast, but if we had left it at the speed that I did it, it would seem very slow and take forever. So I'm using the darker here. And if you want these colors of brown to blend with each other, you have to come back in while they're wet. If you wait till they're dry, they won't blend as well. Okay, now I'm coming back in with some black, I think, or some very dark brown. Now see how that leaf has already given me trouble. I put it in there and it's the wrong color. It blends right into the wood. It's going the wrong direction. It's just the worst leaf ever, but it's there. It's easy when you're doing leaves like that, especially freehand, to just kind of get overdone. Okay, so notice how I load my brush and I do one color. Then I load my brush and I do another color. Because good paint will fill your brush and really give you plenty to work with. And again, I just can't state it enough. If you really are interested in painting, even just for your own enjoyment, see there's darker, that's that dark brown. Buy the best paper and the best paint you can within reason, okay? Canson watercolor paper, which is what I use to do my cards that I sell, you can get a pack of 30 sheets of that are 9 by 12 for like $5 at Walmart. And it's just as good a paper at Walmart as it is at Michael's, and it's half the cost. So might as well get it at Walmart. But if you're still painting with those little kitty paints like you did in elementary school, go to Walmart and buy a travel pack. It's like watercolors you can take to paint elsewhere. And there won't be a lot of colors. There might be 16 or something. But it'll be like a Cotman, or is it Wilson and Newton or something. And I painted with those for months. Before my son bought me, I guess for Christmas maybe? No, for my birthday, he bought me the Kuretakes, which I loved. And I use those and use those and use those. They don't give quite as much vibrancy of color as the Mission Gold that my husband got me for Christmas. But I like using the combination of the two because one set has some strengths and the other set has a different strength. So now you see there, I've got one white spot in that picture. That's a piece of fruit I forgot to paint. I will come back and get to it. Now I'm going to do the little branches on the bottom. I will say speeding up the speed of the video makes it look like I'm a whole lot better painter than I am. I'm actually doing all of this very slowly and very carefully, and I think about it a lot as I go. This makes it look like I'm blazing fast, and I'm not. And you know, there's really no right or wrong here because I sketched this myself. I can do whatever I want. I can add little twigs in, and I could put little knobs on things and add more fruit and add more leaves. Whatever I do, none of it's a mistake because it's mine. I'm cleaned up my spilled water there. Now we'll get this piece of fruit. Now, in order for this one to look like it's really behind the other one, there has to be color contrast. So since the connecting point is pretty yellow on the forward fruit, I'm going to make the one in the back darker and redder. Okay, now it all has to dry, and I can't blow dry it because I still haven't taken off my masking fluid. And although I want it to dry, little parts of it are going to bug me, and I'm going to keep on doing stuff. Oh, that was a spot where I had accidentally streaked some of that brown, and so instead of trying to fix it on that blue background, I just came in and painted a leaf in. And then it was too dark, so I took a little bit of it off. So that's one way to correct something on your own painting is put a leaf over it. Now again, I'm going to be just fiddling with it while I'm waiting for some parts to dry. Oh, now I'm going to go back and add black. Now this is useful on these branches. Every place where a branch forks or is kind of underneath something or is in the shade, it should be darker. And so you can come back in with black, and it really makes the picture pop. It gives it wonderful three-dimensionality. See all those little nooks right there, little elbows of the tree. All of those. And I'm going in with some wet paint, but it's not too runny. You don't want it to run. You want it to stay where you put it. But then I'm going to go back in with just a wet brush. And just the amount of wetness, see, I'm using my paper towel to take some of the water off, just to make that black soften it some so it's not so harsh on its edges. And really, on a painting like this, you want it to look very rich. You don't want really any empty spots. Everything should have color. It doesn't have to all be bright color, but it should all have color. And the little lines in there that look like they're white, that's actually the masking fluid. And the verdict is still out on whether I liked masking fluid on this painting or not. You'll see me take it off here in a little bit. I'm trying to get it dry. And then I'm going to take some masking tape. And I'm just going to gently dab at the places where the masking fluid is to lift it off. Now, if I hadn't used masking fluid, see, I still can't leave it alone. I got to paint a little bit more. I'm trying to get that leaf outlined. That leaf is bothering me. Now I'm going to go in while it's drying with a little bit of colored pencils. Colored pencils are really useful at the end for little places that you're kind of afraid to go back into with a paintbrush. Like I've got little places where the blue of the sky didn't quite get to the edge of an object. And I have two nice collections of I wish I had watercolor pencils, of just colored pencils, and they work great for this. I've been so privileged that my family members have gifted me with lots of wonderful art stuff. Paper, really good paper, colored pencils, watercolors, And don't buy expensive brushes. You don't really need them. Okay, masking tape. Okay, now we're going to take off this masking fluid. Let's see what we think. Do we like the white? Does it look good? Does it make it look like the light is really shining on those places? You have to do this gently. There are people who don't like it because they say it tears their paper as they lift it off. The better your paper, the less it'll tear it. If you use really cheap paper, if you use mixed media or something, I would not advise. Like this would probably tear up Canson watercolor paper more than it will this. I think B paper is a bit better. What do you think about that white? Yay or nay? I'm trying to find the spots where the... Okay, now I'm fixing to take that off. Now look at that. Doesn't that just is terrible. So I'm looking at that leaf thinking, see, that's actually, and I'm going to try to go in and fix it. Now it looks worse. Tried purple. I think I come back in with some green too. Boy, it looks really bad. It looks worse now than, yeah, now I'll come back in with some green. Once that masking fluid has been there on the paper, I think it just never quite behaves the same again. See, I should have been more careful. Now I'm going back in with some brown. Okay. I think Adam's going to post a picture of it. I think I'm going to use a little bit of pencil. I've got a few places where the masking fluid is right next to the blue, and I didn't want that. I want a little bit of a barrier, and then I'm going to sign it, and then it's done. There you go. Thank you. It's been fun.